Thank you for joining the RTC Executive Advisory Committee meeting. Chair Anderson, staff is ready for you to begin the meeting.
Thank you. Good morning. Chair Travis Anderson for the record. I'd like to call to order the May 28, 2020 meeting of the Executive Advisory Committee. RTC staff will begin with a roll call of committee members, introduce staff on the line, and also touch on a few housekeeping items.
Thank you, Chair Anderson. David Gloria, Management Analyst for the RTC for the record. I'll be calling your name in alphabetical order. Please confirm your attendance as I read your name. Chair Travis Anderson.
Present.
Mario Bermudez.
Here.
Dennis Cederberg.
Present.
Lisa Corrado.
Here.
Dale Daffern.
I'm here, David.
Mike Jansen.
Present.
Keegan Luttrell.
Present.
Michael Mays. Michael Mays is not on the line. Ed McGuire.
Present.
Joanna Murphy.
Present.
Vice Chair Sandra Rosenberg.
Here.
Richard Sechrist.
Present.
Robert Summerfield.
Present.
Thank you. Please note that we have several RTC staff on the line for today's meeting. This includes Mr. David Swallow, Deputy CEO, Mr. John Penuelas, Senior Director of Engineering, Mr. Craig Rayburn, Director of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, Mr. David Clyde, Associate General Counsel, Mr. Joe Damiani, Manager of Engineering, Ms. Deborah Reardon, Principal Transportation Planner, and finally, Ms. Eileen Pastor, Government Affairs Supervisor, will be reading public comments. We also have Mr. Fred Solis from the City of Las Vegas and Monique Ho with Nelson Nygaard with us on the line. As the chair mentioned, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. When Chair Anderson asks for comments from the committee or calls for a vote, please remember to unmute yourself before speaking. Remember to state your name for the record before providing comment. Be sure to mute your line if you are not speaking. Voting will be done verbally. The chair will call for ayes and nays. If there are no nays, then the motion will carry. If there are nays, then a roll call vote will be required. In the event of a roll call vote, please wait for your name to be read to provide your vote. The chair will call for any comments or questions after an item has been presented. Thank you, Chair Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Gloria. Mr. Penuelas, for the first item, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. John Penuelas, RTC Senior Director of Engineering for the record. The first item on the agenda is to conduct the first citizens participation period. But before we get to that, I'd like to mention that on March 22nd, 2020, the State of Nevada Executive Department issued Declaration of Emergency Directive 006, which suspended the requirement to have a physical location for public meetings. Pursuant to Directive 006 and for the health and safety of the community, this meeting is being held telephonically. To allow for public participation, the RTC is accepting public comments via email at publiccomments@rtc.com. Comments can be submitted to be read aloud or to be added directly to the written record. Ms. Eileen Pastor will provide the public comments received by the RTC.
Thank you, Chair Anderson, for the record. This is the first time set aside for public comment. This time is limited to comments on items included on the agenda. Comments will be limited to the first 500 words, with the remaining words to be included in the written record. Do we have any comments?
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Eileen Pastor for the record. There are no public comments.
Thank you. Moving on, Mr. Penuelas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Penuelas again. The next item is to approve the agenda. Your agenda is in order and ready for your approval.
Are there any comments or questions from the committee? If there are no questions or comments, can I get a motion?
Dale Daffern, motion to approve the agenda.
We have a motion on the floor for approve. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay. The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Penuelos.
Yes, thank you, Chair Anderson. John Penuelos again. The next item is to approve the consent agenda. This consists of items 3 through 18 and can be taken in one motion.
Are there any comments or questions from the committee? Hearing no comments or questions, I seek a motion.
Keegan Littrell, I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
We have a motion on the floor for approval. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed, please say nay. This motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Penuelos.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Anderson. John Penuelos again. Item 19. We are on item 19, are we not?
We are.
Okay, thank you. Item 19 is to adopt the fuel tax and question 10 capital improvements program for fiscal years 2021 through 2030. Now, as the committee will remember, we kicked off the capital improvement program development process at your last meeting. Subsequent to that meeting, RTC staff has met with you and your teams to incorporate your priority projects into the 2021 10-year plan to the greatest extent possible, given the latest estimates from our Chief Financial Officer on available revenue over those 10 years. We would just like to say that the RTC very much appreciates the spirit of cooperation displayed between the agencies to bring forth a robust capital plan even during these very challenging times. So with that, Mr. Chairman, staff recommends approval.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the committee?
This is Dennis Cedarberg. I have a comment on the plan. We received several versions of it throughout the time period of the development of the plan. One of those was received April 30th, and that was kind of the final plan. And then subsequent to the April 30th plan, the Chief Financial Office of RTC stated that the revenues would be reduced. So the plan was revised by RTC, and each entity's overall program was reduced. However, the RTC CIP program was not reduced. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Go ahead.
Thank you, John Penuelos again. For the record, yes, Dennis, that is correct, and we thank you very much for pointing that out. We have looked at our first year allocation, and we feel that there are approximately $2 million worth of reductions that could be made in that first year. Mr. Chairman, there are two ways to handle this. The first way would be the simplest and frankly the preferred way, but there's another option as well. The first way is to simply adopt the plan as submitted, and then we will process an amendment in July showing those reductions. That has the advantage of allowing us to really scrutinize things even more than we already have to make sure we have found every dollar in savings. The second option, which is equally acceptable, which is going to take a little more time, is to have me read into the record our proposed changes to that first year allocation, and then you could vote on the amended capital plan, which would then be forwarded in that amended state to the board for approval on June 11th. The RTC can go any way the committee desires. That's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, this is Dennis Cedarberg.
Yes, go ahead.
I prefer adopting it today and then coming back with the amendment.
I would agree with that. Any other comments from committee members on this particular situation? Hearing none. Can I get a motion? I agree. I think we would like to adopt this. Can I get a motion on item number 19?
This is Robert Summerfield. Motion to approve subject to a future amendment as stated by RTC staff.
We have a motion on the floor for approval. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. The motion
Aye.
carries. The motion carries, and we'll turn it back to Mr. Penuelos.
Yes, thank you. I apologize. I was on mute there for a second. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Penuelos again for the record. The next two items will be introduced by Mr. Craig Rayborn.
Thank you, Mr. Penuelos. Craig Rayborn, Director of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, for the record. Item 20 is to receive a final update on the Bruce Street Green and Complete Street study. So the RTC, as the Southern Nevada MPO, worked with the City of Las Vegas and Kimley Horn to conduct a technical analysis to facilitate Green Street multimodal connectivity along the Bruce Street corridor. The findings of the Bruce Street Green and Complete Street study include recommendations on complete street elements for pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit users. It also identifies potential safety enhancements at key intersections, analyze the application of green infrastructure within the corridor, as well as proposed connections from Bruce Street to the city of North Las Vegas, Cashman Center, Fremont Street, Hollingsworth Elementary, and the Spencer Greenway Trail. The study began in May of 2018 and wrapped up in April of this year. Mr. Fred Solis from the City of Las Vegas is here to provide an update on the study. Mr. Solis?
Thank you, Craig. For the record, Fred Solis, City of Las Vegas Planning Department. Can we have the next slide, please? So as some background, the study area is a 2.6 mile stretch between Charleston Boulevard to the south and North Las Vegas Boulevard to the north. For those of you that aren't familiar with the corridor, it's essentially the midpoint between Eastern Avenue and Maryland Parkway. The corridor bisects 3 of our downtown master plan districts, so we do see this as an important multimodal link, north-south link between downtown North Las Vegas and downtown Las Vegas, especially as our downtown redevelopment moves eastward. Finally, as the Spencer Greenway Trail is built out, the corridor will provide vital bicycle and pedestrian connectivity between UNLV, downtown Las Vegas, and downtown North Las Vegas. So as that trail is built out, we do see this as a connection northward through downtown Las Vegas and to North Las Vegas. Next slide, please. So here's just a map of the corridor. The corridor is there in orange. Moving from north to south on the map, some highlights, with obviously the first one being the connection to downtown North Las Vegas. Through the corridor, we have 6 schools on the corridor. About midpoint, we have the Cashman Center, which the City of Las Vegas sees as a redevelopment site. Moving southward, you have the connection to Fremont Street, which going westward goes into our downtown core. And finally, down at Charleston, we have the connection over to the Spencer Greenway Trail and down to UNLV. Next slide. So we did some public outreach, and our key efforts were an 11-question bilingual online survey, which we had 51 responses to. We had 5 stakeholder meetings with school principals within the corridor. We had 2 neighborhood meetings, and we had 2 pop-up community meetings at the Safe Summer Nights event at Hollingsworth Elementary and a Las Vegas Lights soccer game. For all events, we did have a Spanish speaker on the team, so those with limited English skills could communicate and contribute to the study as well. Next slide. So the key findings to the outreach were that 75% of the respondents were unsatisfied with the existing landscape and shade in the corridor. 62% were unsatisfied with the existing bicycle facilities. 54% felt that safety improvements such as sidewalks, wider sidewalks, crosswalks, better street lighting were the most needed improvements. And 68% of respondents indicated the desire for a park or open space in the vicinity of the US 95 I-515 viaduct. Next slide. One more. Next slide. There we go. So the corridor was divided into 10 segments. Each segment has recommendations based on analysis consulted by the consultant. For most segments, the study recommended alternatives with both a lower cost retrofit improvement as well as a higher cost complete street improvement. So we felt that this is really important part of the study. There's always competition for CIP dollars. We thought it was important that we identify not only the expensive complete street components to the corridor, but also lower cost improvements such as sidewalk infill, mid-block crossings, curb extensions, things along those lines. Next slide, please. So here's an example of one of our lower cost improvements. There's a number of sidewalk gaps in the corridor, so this would just be an easy, simple, lower cost fix to really enhance the walkability of the corridor. Next slide. So here's another lower cost improvement. This is at the intersection of Bruce and Gregson near the Blind Center. The upper right picture is the existing condition. So there's one marked crosswalk. There are 2 bus stops on either side of Bruce Street. So we just proposed in this instance some of these lower cost improvements would be an additional marked crosswalk with flashers. Just make it a lot more easy and comfortable for those pedestrians to get from one bus stop to the other to either side. Next slide, please. So here's an example of one of our 10 segments. We won't go into every segment in this presentation, but this is just kind of give you a general idea of what we did for each segment. This particular segment is between Charleston and Fremont Street. The first section on top there is the existing condition. The alternative number 1 is our lower cost retrofit. So in this case, you're staying within the curb lines. We're just reducing the width of the on-street parking to add a bike buffer lane. And finally, you have your alternative number 2, which would be your ultimate build out, higher cost. Move the curb lines, add landscaping, and widen sidewalks to the standard complete street product. Next slide, please. So in addition to those 10 segments, we also had 5 focus areas, and these focus areas we felt that were deserved additional analysis since they were pretty important to the corridor as a whole. These 5 these focus areas were Hollingsworth Elementary, the I-515 US 95 open space area, the intersection of Bruce Street and Maryland Parkway, which is where Cashman Field's at, and then the connection to Spencer Greenway and the Fremont Street connection intersection. Next slide. Again, we won't go through all 5 focus areas, but this is an example of, we'll give you a couple examples here in this presentation. The first is the Maryland Bruce intersection, and up at the top left, there's the parking lot for Cashman. As I said, we do see that as a redevelopment site in the future. That way, we want that connection from Bruce to Cashman. In this instance, if you're traveling north on Bruce Street as a bicyclist or a pedestrian, there really is no easy connection there across the street from Bruce to Cashman. So if we go next slide. So we just propose a simple T intersection signalized with crosswalks to get from the north side to the south side. I'm sorry, from the south side to the north side and vice versa, I guess. There is a lot of excess right of way there adjacent to it, so you can use that for landscape as it's shown here, public art, whatever public use we could we could put in there. Next slide, please. There you go. So this is the area underneath or adjacent to the highway there. We acknowledge that we're aware that NDOT's planning their downtown access project at this time. So any improvements we would need to wait until after that construction was completed down the road. However, we did want to get it into this plan because we do see it as an important opportunity to add park space to the area. So this is the existing condition and what it looks like now. Next slide, please. So this could be a park, a huge build out. We have various amenities, including sports courts. We have a dog park, some passive space there. Again, this could possibly add a lot of park space to an area that really lacks park space. Next slide, please. So finally, at the end of the document, we have an implementation matrix. We feel that this is important because they kind of give you an overview of each improvement for each segment, and it gives you a level of cost and commitment. So as we're looking for low-hanging fruit or a full complete project, we can look back at this matrix and pick out individual projects to really improve the pedestrian and bike experience within the corridor. That concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Solis. Is there any comments or questions from the committee? Hearing no questions or comments, do we have a motion?
This is Mario with Clark County. A motion for approval or acceptance.
Craig, is this for approval or just accept the presentation?
It would just be for acceptance.
Motion to accept.
We have a motion on the floor. All of those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. The motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Rayborn.
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Again, Craig Rayborn for the record. The next item, item 21, is to receive a presentation and provide input on the Southern Nevada Coordinated Public Transit Human Services Transportation Plan update. Ms. Monique Ho with Nelson Nygaard will present the plan to the committee. Monique?
Thank you, Craig. Monique Ho for the record. Good morning, everyone. I'm Monique, a transportation planner with Nelson Nygaard, and today I'll provide a quick and very brief update on the Coordinated Public Transit Human Services Transportation Plan. Next slide. So under federal transit law, projects selected to receive funding under the Enhanced Mobility for Individuals and Individuals with Disabilities Program, or Section 5310, must be included in a locally developed coordinated plan. For the past year, Nelson Nygaard has been working very closely with RTC of Southern Nevada to update the 2015 plan and to ensure that this updated plan reflects the current and projected state of the region's transportation ecosystem. The plan brings together a lot of work that was in collaboration with public, private, and nonprofit transportation and human service providers. And the plan includes an inventory of existing transportation services in the region, and identifies transportation needs and regional service gaps. And it also includes an action plan. Next slide. So why are we doing this plan? The purpose of the Coordinated Transportation Plan and Coordinated Transportation Planning more broadly, it aims to enhance the mobility for individuals with disabilities, older adults, and people at low incomes. These are the same folks who are on the margins who are currently struggling during this current global pandemic. So this plan, now more than ever, is incredibly important. Next slide. So what I'll show here is just a high-level overview of the process that went into the plan development. This plan is the result of a year-long process that involved working with various stakeholders. I think in total, we've met with over 300 folks, representatives from transportation agencies, as well as human service providers. And we began this process first with a very extensive existing conditions analysis to identify service area gaps, duplication of transportation services, and transportation needs that are specific to the Southern Nevada region. We also created a pretty extensive inventory of existing transportation services in the region. Together with our stakeholder advisory committee, which is comprised of public, private, and nonprofit transportation and human services providers, we developed a set of goals and strategies to address some of these gaps, as well as to identify opportunities to facilitate improved coordination of existing services. And finally, we also worked with these same stakeholders to prioritize strategies, to identify potential funding sources, and also to identify organizations to lead the implementation for these prioritized strategies. This prioritization scheme that we carried forward in our previous engagement also took into account the current global health crisis and anticipated economic downturn. Next slide. So through this year-long process, we learned a lot about the region's transportation challenges. As you all know, Clark County is incredibly vast, over 7,000 square miles. And that makes coordinating transportation services very challenging, especially when we're working with marginalized groups who have very specific transportation needs. A majority of the fixed route transit service is being provided by RTC and the Southern Nevada Transit Coalition, or SNTC. And most of that service is predominantly concentrated in the urban core of Clark County. Conversely, we do have a few transportation providers who serve outlying areas such as Mesquite and Laughlin. However, these are not well connected to the regional fixed route network, and that creates a lot of transportation challenges for those who need access to critical services that are more readily available in the valley that may not be available where they reside. Next slide. Other challenges that we heard from our one-on-one interviews, roundtables, and meetings with transportation providers throughout the county include the following. We heard that the built environment, and also observed just in being in the area prior to COVID, the built environment does not easily support transit connectivity or walking. Shared demand response and on-demand services are limited, and that's mostly due to limited available funding. We also learned that transportation providers, both on the public and nonprofit side, are experiencing constraints in service due to funding shortfalls, and that was also prior to the current global health crisis. There's also an inconsistent access to social services in certain parts of the county, as well as within the Las Vegas Valley. And finally, we learned that transit trips are very long, and that is partly attributed to where social services are located and how big the county is in general. But from that, we learned that would-be riders and existing riders may be discouraged to use the service due to long durations, infrequent service, and concerns related to safety and reliability. Next slide. So from the learnings that we've gathered in our analysis and from meeting with stakeholders, we compiled a list of goals, and this was created in conjunction with our stakeholder advisory committee. The coordinated transportation goals for this plan include the following. We want to expand mobility options, increase awareness of transportation services, leverage technology, improve connections to transit, and expand regional collaboration. From these goals, we then distilled a pretty long list of strategies as well as an action plan to help realize these strategies. Next slide. And finally, what's next for this plan? As for next steps, the draft plan is currently available for review on RTC's website. We are in the process of wrapping up the final draft of the plan and are participating in several meetings to gather some initial feedback that we will incorporate into the final plan. Once the plan is submitted, it'll go to the RTC board sometime this summer. And members of the stakeholder advisory committee that we've been working with throughout this process, we're very engaged the entire time. And we found in our previous meeting with them that they've agreed to meet on a quarterly basis to keep this plan alive. And that's it for me.
Thanks so much, Unique. This is Deb Reardon. For the record, so this meeting has been publicly noticed as an opportunity for the community to provide comments on the plan. And so first, I'd like to recap 4 themes that we've heard during the public comment period through stakeholder meetings, which will be reflected in the final draft. So first, partner shared impacts of the pandemic on providing transportation. Challenges include things like social distancing requirements impacting shared rides, declining revenue, and also the need to coordinate sanitation protocols. There have also been some new opportunities, such as the Nevada-Can collaboration, food delivery partnerships, and also increases in pedestrian and bicycle activity. So these topics and also ongoing coordination will be included in the plan's conclusion. Second, we heard that transportation needs for low-income youth are continuing to grow. And so plan strategies related to microtransit and co-location of services aims to address these growing challenges. And we're also planning to work with communities in schools next week to identify any additional strategies. So third, a potential inventory gap in adult daycare transportation providers was identified, which we will be correcting by adding some additional organizations. And lastly, there's ongoing interest to serve people outside of the paratransit boundary, addressed through strategies such as exploring more on-demand services. So thanks so much for the opportunity to share the plan today. And at this time, we welcome any comments, feedback, or questions from the committee.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from our committee?
This is Lisa Corrado. I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation, and I'm excited to dig into this a little further. Could we maybe follow up, Deb, with you and your team on how we might be able to make use of this study?
Yes, hi, Lisa. Sure, that would be great. We'd be happy to do it.
Thank you.
Sandra Rosenberg from NDOT. Thank you for this presentation. My question relates to both this plan as well as some of the planning work RTC is doing on the streets and highway side as well. You know, one of the themes you heard was existing infrastructure, and both to serve transit as well as active transportation and this concern about ridership going down. Are we looking at specific corridors to focus on providing more space for active transportation? Is that something that's coming out of this or other studies in this area?
Hi there, thanks for your question. Within this particular plan, we did not look at any particular corridors, given that the primary focus is on identifying opportunities to improve coordinated transportation planning. That said, we do call out some strategies or potential pathways to begin that process. We also reviewed certain plans that spoke to the active transportation planning that's happening within the region. So while it isn't a primary focus of the plan, we did get the discussion started with a lot of stakeholder groups. So to your question, we did not identify specific corridors. However, it was discussed at a very high level within our plan.
Okay, thank you. And this is Sandra again. Just one other comment. I see one of your strategies for programs is establishing a formal statewide transit association. I assume you're working with our folks as well, because that's something we're going to be focusing on in the next couple of years as well with some of our planning activities. So I'm happy to see that on there. So thank you.
Hi, Sandra. This is Deb Reardon. Yeah, that strategy actually came from NDOT Transit through our interviews and coordination with your team.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Do we have any other additional comments? If not, I would seek a motion.
This is Mario with
Motion
Clark
to approve
County.
as outlined, Dale Dafford.
Okay.
I'm sorry, will you say that again, Dale?
The motion was just to approve the plan or study as outlined. I guess that's what we're looking for.
That's my understanding. Is that correct, Craig?
Actually, Dale and Travis, this, again, Craig Rayborn for the record. The motion we would just be looking for here is simply just to accept the report. We'll be bringing this back to you at a subsequent meeting after we complete the public comment process and have all that analysis done.
Okay. Dale, would you mind modifying your motion?
Yeah, motion. I don't know, Craig, do you just want the study as outlined? That's the way I'm looking at it, is it come back with further recommendations or information?
I think the motion that would probably be best at this time would just simply be to accept the report, to accept the presentation.
10-4. Motion to accept the presentation.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. That motion carries. Thank you. Mr. Penuelos.
Yes, thanks again, Mr. Chairman. John Penuelos for the record. This brings you to item 22, which is your last opportunity for citizens' participation.
Thank you. This is the second time set aside for public comment. Just a reminder that comments will be limited to the first 500 words, with the remaining words to be included in the written record. Do we have any comments?
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Again, Eileen Pastor for the record. There are no public comments.
Thank you. Any comments from the committee or staff? Hearing no comments. Thank you. And I will close the item. This meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Bye. Thank you.